she came across as like Stalin's twin sister. She was evil.
The progressive princess known as Jacinda Ardern.
That's the lady. Very selective when they want to be compassionate and tolerant. I'm going to start using that from now on, the woke princess. I've not heard anyone call her that before. Over here, we just call her mental. I'd like to talk about your former prime minister, because that's the only prime minister I actually know the name of, and that's because during COVID, she came across as like Stalin's twin sister. She was evil. She looked evil. She sounded evil, and the things she was doing. So you know exactly who I'm talking about. Who am I talking about?
That would be the progressive princess known as Jacinda Ardern.
That's the lady.
Yeah. Jacinda was probably a very interesting entry into Parliament. She, of course, spent, I believe it was 9 years in the Tony Blair administration. So she was born in Morrinsville in New Zealand, a small little country town. She came up. She was picked very early on to be into left-wing politics, and she was mentored by someone who you may or may not know, which is Helen Clark. Helen Clark was a very, very far leftist, very Marxist type of personality in New Zealand. She spent 9 years in Tony Blair's government as a researcher, and then she came back and she went straight into New Zealand Parliament.
I never knew that about Tony Blair. I never knew that.
Yep, yeah. So she got slotted in to the leadership of the Labour Party in the 2017 election cycle. And it was, again, this is important to what we know her as, because there's only a few people who would have the strength, arguably the ruthlessness, to be able to slot her in mere months before the election that she and the Labour Party eventually won. And so she was slotted in there. They won very, very close. And then she started. So many people, when they think about Jacinda Ardern, they think about the COVID years and her policies during that time. But her progressively and more moderate to far left policies actually started in 2017, where she, for example, she pushed the formation of more money going into cancer drugs 1 year away, and instead replaced that with puberty blockers and taxpayer-funded sex reassignment surgeries. So she was very strong in terms of that very experimentation that we see being done on children. And I'm sure at some point we'll bring up the Tavistock Clinic. So from 2017, she was already quite far. Now, where most of the world knew her would have been actually two phases. One was the Muslim shootings, the one where over 50 Muslims were shot by an Australian gunman, and then she became worldwide famous for hugging people while she was wearing a hijab and things of that nature. Then in the COVID times, she was very ruthless, extremely ruthless in her policies. She always attempted to utilize words such as be kind, be genuine, authentic. She was known in Parliament as the person before leader of being the person who would be sent to the other side to socially lubricate the way forward for policies that they wanted. So she carried that, but it was in stark contrast to the policies that she was making, which was utterly ruthless in terms of people would have to be kept away from seeing their loved ones passing away. So there's many stories of how loved ones were dying, and this is the way that New Zealanders had to say farewell, by phone while they were stuck in MIQ hotels. And it was so ruthless. And at the same time, the incompetence of her policies was laid bare for all to see. She made up a title saying that she was the Minister for Reduction of Child Poverty. Well, no, nothing happened. Poverty actually increased in many sectors and metrics. She pushed what I would regard as very racist policies. That is, in New Zealand, we have the indigenous group many people know as Māori. That's where the pāka comes from in rugby games. And she pushed policies that meant that Māori, and I'm part Māori as well. And she pushed it so that we would have racial benefits. For example, surgeries and medical operations, I would get it before someone else because I carry Māori blood. Someone else would be a white person, which I think is disgusting. I think that's really wrong. And so you'd have all these policies, such as the sexual experimentation that was seen on the children, the pushing of drag queen education onto children, as well as puberty blockers. You would also have that extreme climate alarmism aspect going on, where she even announced at one point that all gas would be removed from New Zealand society, and that was a policy that they were going to put it. They were going to go also full carbon net zero by I think it was 2035 one part, and then 2050 on another part, which was Bjorn Lomborg himself was able to do an easy conservative cost of $5 trillion. So her policies were either incompetent or brutally ruthless. And on the other stage, as a media darling, she was put out there as a progressive princess, a be kind leader, but it was absolute nonsense in terms of it. She was ruthless, brutal, and that mask started to slip in the year before the election that we would have here, where she got infamous for saying, a reporter said that it's put out there that there's going to be two tiers, two citizens of New Zealand. And she said, yep, it is what it is. Yep. And that's where she was effectively gunning for anyone who has not had the Pfizer vaccination. And it was an incredible time, very much a time of shame in my regard for my own people who were swayed under her veneer of authenticity and kindness, and at the same time we're very fear-mongered effectively by the COVID alarmism that we saw there. So an extraordinary time.
Yeah, and what you've said there wasn't just only happening in New Zealand. We've got Trudeau in Canada. There's other leaders. There's some governors in Australia who are just as mental. Macron and others. It just seemed to affect the West suddenly, and it all came out, and it was a crazy time. Now, going back to the woke princess, I'm going to start using that from now on, the woke princess. I've not heard anyone call her that before. Over here, we just call her mental. Some of the COVID stuff she did, tell me if I'm wrong, didn't she stop New Zealand citizens flying back into New Zealand? Going home?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and there was lots of things she was doing that was just tyrannical. And it's not even like it was tyrannical, but you know what? It turned out that she was right, because she saved millions of lives in New Zealand, and other places in the world all think she's a saint now because they should have done what she's done. It turns out that the average person on the street was correct. It was a bad dose of the flu, and it was dangerous to sick people. And it wasn't. I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm not saying it wasn't dangerous to some people. Of course it was, but it wasn't the Armageddon that leaders like her were telling us it was.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really interesting. But part of my job, one of the jobs that I do is also to help people de-escalate in situations. And when I'm going around the country training on these teams, many times it's actually coming up now that be kind, which was a very much a well-utilized term that she would use, be kind has become a strong trigger for many New Zealanders. When I'm speaking to them, there's just that word when we bring it out, okay, be kind. Immediately, there's an immediate feeling of hackles raising, and this has been told to me by many people around New Zealand that they remember it, and it's very specifically around Jacinda herself who did that. You guys are right. She brought in a ruthless lottery system as well, and she had no bones about it. And that's why I mentioned about the whole saying goodbye to mum, saying goodbye to dad, saying goodbye to children. The final farewells had to be done through a phone, and she didn't. It appeared that she just didn't care, that she was just so focused on what she wanted to get done. And what was interesting, you say it really well too, because it wasn't just New Zealand, but it was the OECD, it was the West. And what we saw was an interesting power axis, an axis of power, if you will, between the politicians, the media, and the academics. It really feels, in a way, like what that Belgium scientist came up with when he said mass formation psychosis. The idea that these groups had a saturation of messaging, and the populace, we followed it. We became hateful of our own people who were not vaccinated. We started accusing them of being bad people simply because they felt a bit nervous about the Pfizer vaccination. In New Zealand, it was brutal. We saw things like the Biden administration talking about it. We saw some of the areas in England talking about it. We saw across the West, as you say, that we fell under the spell of that axis. In the New Zealand context, we had people shut down all over the place. We weren't able to move out of our homes. I'm not sure I'm curious as to know what it's like in Britain, but in New Zealand, our children are still suffering greatly from the effects of that stoppage of school. Another after effect, which I think is a good thing, is the trust in New Zealand towards media, legacy media, has never been as low as it has been. Records never been lower ever since records first began, and that keeps on going down further and further, which I think is a good thing. But the other parts, our economy is near ruined. Our trust systems, our trust in institutes are near ruined, and I think there's a skepticism there, which is healthy, but New Zealanders are just not trusting our institutes anymore. The police, not just the media, but the police, the fires, across the board, we have a great deal. And it really does stem from Jacinda's ruthlessness and brutality of her policies that was put out to the world as thumbs up, really, really good. But in reality, it was such an iron core brutal. And you know what? Not Margaret Thatcher type of iron, but just a very Marxist style brutality where there was no positive effect that came out from it. While some people don't like Margaret Thatcher, I think what she did was really good, mostly. And it's interesting because I was talking to my friend today about yourself, and she actually mixes a lot with British tourists who come over to New Zealand. And she relayed the story because they do this most days. They go down and they say hi and talk to the British tourists. Many of them say, "Oh, Jacinda, she's an awesome leader, isn't she? She loves you, all that sort of stuff." And then my friend says, "No, most of us can't stand her. We don't like her." And then the British tourists turn around, and this is apparently happens on most interactions, that they say, "Oh, we couldn't stand her either, but we thought you liked her here in New Zealand." And so this is a repeated conversation that my friend has, and she said, "Please tell Nick that this is what happens when we're in New Zealand. we don't like her."
Well, those tourists are just being polite, because it's very impolite to go to someone else's country and say we don't like your leader. That's rude. And the British and the English, we try not to be rude. But once you tell us your thoughts, we'll tell you our thoughts then. Yeah, I mean, the same thing happened in the UK. You know, trust in the police is gone, trust in the NHS, trust in politicians, because they keep lying to us. We all know they're lying to us. We've got proof now. It was all lies. We've got proof our politicians are telling us one thing, but doing the complete opposite, with them and their family and their friends having affairs, having parties, driving across the country. Keir Starmer was having elocution lessons when you weren't allowed to meet anyone face to face. So we know we've always known politicians lie, but now we've got proof that they lie about everything. And a lot of that came out of the COVID years. And when you said about be kind, the most vile abuse I ever get online comes from people that in their bio, they have three things. They have be kind, love the NHS, and a pride flag. And if you've got those three things in your...
I knew that was coming up.
Yeah, when you've got those three things in your bio, that just means to me that you're a nasty piece of work.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? They come out with this, hey, be inclusive. We want all love and all kind. And as soon as they know that you're anywhere like a conservative, libertarian, or anything else, you're a scumbag. They want you shut down. They want you to shut up. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, let's all be compassionate and be tolerant. Oh, Nick Buckley, oh, we're not going to be tolerant of you though, and compassionate towards you. Very selective when they want to be compassionate and tolerant.